This is said to be North Korean troops coming under fire in Kursk, dozens of figures scattering across the open ground, running, say the Ukrainians, back towards Russian lines.
They appeared on the horizon like a dark tide. 30 columns of trucks, armored personnel carriers, and glinting troop transports rolling through a border plain so quiet it might have been painted. For weeks the world had whispered about a secretive deal. Thousands of North Korean soldiers being readied for deployment, their boots to tread a foreign theater. Moscow thought it had secured a show of force. Pyongyang thought it had bought influence. What neither expected was how quickly the script could be ripped up. In 16 minutes, 15,000 trained fighters ceased to exist as an operational force. Not dead, not vanished into thin air, but unmade, neutralized, disoriented, and impotent. The trick wasn't brute firepower. It was a masterclass in information, illusion, and the weaponization of doubt. The operation began months earlier with a campaign nobody outside a handful of intelligence cells noticed. Satellites and signal intercepts painted a messy canvas. Troop movements here, fuel dumps there, a flurry of logistics chatter that suggested an impending redeployment. But Kyiv didn't rush. Instead, it seeded confusion. False orders were fed into networks where they would be noticed by curious ears. Forged memos and doctored briefings appeared in circulation, each one a small, believable lie that nudged perception in a particular direction. The aim was to make the enemy believe the enemy already believed something else, to create a reality inside a reality. Parallel to that came a quieter, more human form of sabotage. Diplomats and intermediaries, many of them shadowy third parties, were nudged to deliver offers and contradictory instructions that played into the minds of commanders. Reposition here, wait there, expect a convoy tomorrow. Rumors spread like a biological agent. They were cheap, contagious, and remarkably effective. When trust fractures inside a tightly wound military machine, hesitation replaces orders. On the technical side, Kyiv's cyber teams and electronic operators worked to shape perception rather than simply destroy it. They didn't need to blow up the radios. They needed to make the radios sing a convincing lie. For weeks, harmless-sounding interference masked subtle spoofed signals. Navigation cues flickered, location beacons blinked where none existed. Screens and command posts displayed routes that led to marshes and bridgeless gaps. Electronic feeds showed phantom columns moving along phantom roads. Commanders who relied on these tools saw what they expected to see. Those who trusted human reports were fed mismatched, carefully timed eyewitness accounts that reinforced the illusion. The result? A whole apparatus of movement built on breadcrumbs of falsehood. When the chosen day arrived, the North Korean force was primed to move into a staging area that, according to their maps and orders, was safe and secure. In their minds, the plan was seamless. In reality, the ground they rolled toward had been prepared, not with mines or ambushes aimed at killing, but with obstacles designed to disable and isolate. But even those obstacles mattered less than the psychological web closing around them. As the first trucks rumbled forward, their comms filled with contradictory traffic, orders to advance, then to halt, confirmations of secure crossings, then urgent warnings of sabotage on the bridges ahead. Drivers slowed. Officers argued. Columns split. Where unity should have delivered momentum, confusion fractured it. Then came the key moment. Coordinated broadcasts over hijacked channels, feeds that appeared to come from high command, announcing an immediate reroute to a narrow corridor already packed with vehicles and equipment. At the same time, drones, small and visually indistinct, hovered over supply nodes and relay points, not to strike, but to watch. From the sky, a picture emerged of bottlenecks and choke points forming in real time. Reports of mortar fire a dozen kilometers away were amplified in a dozen tongues. The noise of war had been turned into a kind of fog machine. Every report multiplied the sense that the world was collapsing around them. What followed next looked like a collapse more than an attack. Trains full of troops stopped on sidings because the tracks ahead were reported washed out. Convoys jammed at intersections because the junction they expected to clear was suddenly said to be mined. In some places, commanders ordered their men to dismount and wait for daylight. In others, officers were pulled into impromptu briefings where new intelligence, selective, distorted, and confident, recommended immediate redeployment. Those orders, issued with apparent authority, were impossible to ignore. After all, the signal had come from their own networks. The signatures looked right. The soldiers who had come to fight now found themselves in a labyrinth of contradictory commands. Panic is an amplifier. When 15,000 people share a single cause, the first cracks spread lightning fast. A rumor of an attack at one bridge cascaded into reports of multiple bridges down. A mistaken mortar blast, perhaps from a nervous sentry, was retold as an orchestrated assault. The result was not annihilation, but paralysis. Vehicles were abandoned, not because they were shot up, but because crews feared being cut off. Supply trucks with fuel and food were left where they sat. Communications teams, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of messages and deceptive signatures, stopped relaying anything at all. For the soldiers on the ground, the world ceased to make operational sense. Kiev's strategy had a merciful twist. It targeted cohesion, not people. Teams had prepared extraction corridors and safe houses for non-combatants. Humanitarian channels were kept open to catch stragglers and those who simply wanted out. Propaganda teams used the moment to amplify messages of surrender and safety for anyone willing to step away from the madness. Broadcasts offered a simple bargain: lay down arms, and you may live to see your children again. For many, the bargain proved irresistible. Small groups peeled off and slipped back across frontiers or into neutral zones. Others, cut off and isolated, surrendered to patrols that had been prepositioned under the pretense of relief. The 16 minutes that broke the force weren't a single lightning strike, but a cascade of micro-events, each one small and plausible. A falsified order, an interference burst, a rumor seeded in a sleepy barracks, a convoy stalled by a harmless traffic jam magnified into crisis. Together they became a storm. The commander's confidence, once a solid wall, liquefied. Without cohesion, logistics collapses into chaos, and 15,000 well-trained soldiers become a series of vulnerable individuals rather than a fighting unit. The political reverberations were immediate. In Pyongyang and Moscow, denials ranked with fury. Analysts in capitals around the world parsed the footage. Grainy cell phone clips of stranded troops, abandoned armored cars, and columns that never reached their destination. Western commentators called the episode a masterstroke of modern warfare, but those words missed the quieter cruelty of the method. It didn't need to kill to win. It needed only to convince, to corrupt the shared reality that armies depend on. For Ukraine, the operation was a demonstration of doctrine as much as of capability. It showed how, in an era of ubiquitous sensors and fragile information ecosystems, perception can be a weapon as lethal as any missile. War had always been about will. Now it was also about what people were willing to believe. A single falsehood, dressed in the right signals and timed with surgical precision, could do what artillery sometimes cannot: erode the trust between orders and action.